Hey everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Crime. This is part 3 of Bardstown Mysteries. In the last episode, we left off at the possible connection between the killing of Tommy Ballard and the murder of Bardstown police officer Jason Ellis. So now we're going back to 2013. As a young kid, all Jason Ellis dreamed of was baseball. His life revolved around it. After he graduated from college, where he met his future wife, he was actually drafted for the minor league baseball team, the Cincinnati Reds. He was known to be talkative, the life of the party, but also the protector. He left baseball in 2005 to start a new adventure, to make a difference in the world. He was married to the love of his life, Amy Ellis, and they were about to have a baby. In 2006, they moved to his wife's home state, Kentucky, and a year later, he had another son. In Kentucky, he became a police officer for the Bardstown Police Department. He worked in the canine unit with his beloved dog, Figo. He was the only narcotics officer in the Bardstown Police Department at the time. He was known to be a great officer who was really good at his job and was doing his best to stop drugs from infiltrating the small town of Bardstown. He was even named Officer of the Year in 2008 for his dedication as a police officer. He also had one son with Down syndrome, but that didn't stop Jason from being a great father. He loved his kids, and he loved his wife. Amy Ellis says he was a great father and a great husband. He never brought his work home with him. He was just a very hands-on dad, always going above and beyond to be in his son's life, while being a police officer working the night shift at the same time. He even coached his son's baseball team, literally just hours before his death. In the middle of his son's baseball game, he was called to a domestic disturbance. So his best friend, who was also a Bardstown police officer, took over the coaching job. When he got to the scene of the disturbance, he saw a man on his porch, and it turned out this man was at his ex-girlfriend's house. She told him to leave, and he didn't. He had also kicked her door in, so Jason escorted him off the premises and gave him a ticket. He went back to his son's baseball game after this, but by the time he got there, the game was over, so he left to continue working. Supposedly, Amy Ellis was supposed to go on a ride-along with her husband that weekend, but she made some comments to a friend about how she misses Jason and wanted to go with him that night. But instead, she stayed home. Jason definitely had an eventful night. He even arrested a man for being drunk and disorderly. Eventually, he calls off at 1:59 a.m. and heads home from the jail. As Amy and her son are asleep on the couch, their usual night routine as they wait for Jason to come home. He never came home. Instead, an officer and a chaplain knocked on Amy's door to tell her that her husband was no longer alive. On May 25, 2013, Jason called off from dispatch for the last time at 1:59 a.m. As he took his normal route home on the Bluegrass Parkway without his dog Figo, he noticed some branches in the road right off his normal exit 34. Being the kind of guy Jason was, he turned on his police lights and got out to clean the debris up. But as he's picking up these branches, he shot 3 times with a 12-gauge shotgun. It was a clear, well-thought ambush for Jason Ellis. He was never able to reach for his service weapon or call for help. His final act was keeping his community roads safe. That's just the kind of guy he was. Around 3 a.m., dispatch receives a call from Jason's CB radio from a woman screaming, "Officer down, officer down."
Officer down, Bluefield Road.
Okay, can you tell if he is breathing?
No, sir, he is not breathing.
We've had a officer killed.
Oh my God, who was it?
Jason Ellis.
His best friend, Andrew Riley, another Bardstown police officer, was the first to arrive on the scene. He saw Jason, who still had branches in his hand. At Jason's funeral, thousands of people from the community and all over Kentucky showed up. people who didn't even know Jason personally. The street was lined with cars 20 miles long after his procession. Complete strangers were coming up to the family saying that Jason had arrested him, but he was such a good guy. Jason's dog, Figo, also played his paw on Jason's casket unprompted. They had such a bond, and Figo retired right after Jason's death and died 4 years later. Amy Ellis lived a cop's wife's worst nightmare. She tells WDRB News, "We were in love. We had a happy marriage. We had hopes and dreams and a future we had planned. My kids had their dad. When that was taken from me, our whole world was turned upside down and shattered. I no longer had the hopes and dreams. My kids will never have their dad." His sons were only 6 and 7 years old at the time of their father's death. At first, investigators of Kentucky State Police thought Jason got in a car accident because of the debris and branches, but then they saw the gunshot wounds that specifically missed his bulletproof vest. His normal canine cruiser was the vehicle he usually drove, but for some reason it was in the shop that day. So we also didn't have his dog Figo because the car just wasn't equipped for that. I've seen that the car was being painted, but that doesn't really matter. He was taking a pool car that didn't have a dash cam on it. Body cams were also not used at this point until about a year after his death. To this day, no one knows who killed Jason Ellis, but the police do know that it was premeditated. When they realized he'd been shot, they thought maybe he was helping someone who broke down, but then they released to the public that the bullet had come from a hill above the exit ramp. He was shot from a long distance from someone who was waiting. Bardstown Police Chief Rick McCubbin said, "We believe that he was a target. This was methodical, precise, planned, and executed in a perfect fashion." He also says that this was so mature and methodical that it almost seemed like it was done military style. He said this was not the training most cops would have. John Lorden made a statement that really stood out to me after I heard McCubbin say this. He said that the bullet the killer used was actually buckshot. A buckshot would be nearly impossible to be ballistically matched to a specific weapon, according to John Lorden and further research that I did on my own. Now, I'm no gun expert, so this really stood out to me. This was clearly someone who did not want to be traced and was also very familiar with guns. It is highly suspected that the person who shot Jason knew him. He was taking his usual route home, probably knew the kind of guy Jason was, and would get out of the car to pick these branches up. Was he getting too close to a massive drug ring that people felt the need to take him out? He was the only narcotics officer in Bardstown, and that was his sole job. Want to know who else was on the Bardstown Police Department and had the night shift the same time Jason Ellis did? Nick Houck. They joined the Bardstown Police Force around the same time. I've seen reports that Nick wasn't working that night, but I can't confirm that. I've also seen reports that the exit where Jason was killed was close to the Houck family farm. But when the chief was asked if Nick Houck was a potential suspect, he said that he never saw any animosity between Nick and Jason. He says that Nick was a quiet police officer and didn't really spend time with the other officers outside of work. He just kept to himself. But Jason, being the outgoing type of guy, would joke around with Nick, and Nick would actually joke back. The funeral director, who is also the county coroner, Field Hofflin, told Oxygen that Jason was shot 3 times, all outside his bulletproof vest. He said all 3 shots were vital to his death. He says that whoever did this was a great shooter. Now this makes me wonder, would the shooter know Jason would be wearing this vest, even on his way home? Jason's family and wife also believed that this was planned, and it was someone who knew his routine. One of his sisters even believes that this was an inside job in law enforcement. They believe, quote, "There's someone pulling the strings in Bardstown," unquote. In Oxygen's documentary, they bring the ballistics expert Jim Cavanaugh, who looked at the scene of Tommy Ballard's murder, to also look at the scene of Jason Ellis's. Dwayne Stanton met up with the chief at the time of Jason's murder, McCubbin, and he described what it looked like. He said that the branches were mostly on the left side of the road, so the driver's side, and it would have been pretty easy to get around. And in fact, one person came forward and said that they did drive around these branches. The ballistics expert said that this was done on purpose from the way the shot was fired. Whoever killed Jason was on top of this hill, closer to the driver's side of the road, so the side where the branches were placed. This expert said if the branches were on the other side, that Jason's car would have blocked the shot. When he went up to this hill, he found a clear line of sight about 35 feet away from where Jason was shot. Now, they did do this during the daytime, and you could actually see where Jason's car would have been. They placed a cop car right where his car was, and that's how he figured out that it was 35 feet away. But there was also a full moon, and Jason did have his lights on, so it would have been pretty easy to see even if it was in the dark. It was also close to Highway 55 that ran north and south, so it would have been easy for the killer or killers to get away from the scene in minutes, especially with a getaway car. Now, he was on the Bluegrass Parkway as he was getting off exit 34. When you get off that exit, that's where Highway 55 is. So they could have also easily just turned around and also got back on the Bluegrass Parkway, which also runs east to west. So once again, you can go in any direction and be out of the way in minutes. So just like Tommy's murder, Jason was shot from far away with a clear line of sight laid out nearby a popular road where the shooter or shooters could easily get away. It just seems too similar to me. Even at the time of Tommy's death, McCubbin was no longer chief, but when he found out the manner of Tommy Ballard's death, he said, quote, "It's just like Jason," unquote. A former FBI profiler also came to talk in the Oxygen documentary, and she also noticed that the two crimes were very similar in the fact that they were both targeted shootings from a distance. And in my opinion, Crystal's disappearance is also related to Tommy's killing. I think that seems pretty obvious, so maybe all three of these cases are somehow connected. Okay, so we're going to go back into my Reddit sleuthing again, and everything I say is all alleged. This post says that the FBI was or is investigating Bardstown Police and the Nelson County Sheriff's Office for corruption. Now, if you remember in Crystal Rogers' video, and actually the last video, I talk about the FBI getting involved. Personally, I don't think the FBI would get involved in a case like this if they weren't looking at something else like corruption. Again, these are just my opinions. These are other people's opinions. This is not fact. Now, I don't think that the entirety of these police departments are corrupt, but there's definitely something going on in the police department in Bardstown politics that we'll get more into in episode 5, but here's some quick background. In 2017, the Bardstown police chief changed 3 times in 1 year. 8 officers had also left the force during this time. Now, I understand that police officers usually retire early in life, but this just raises a red flag. The citizens of Bardstown also want a chief who is an outsider. They say no one in Bardstown is going to be able to clean up this mess. And in my opinion, I think this means they think the cops are corrupt too. The corruption and the inability to solve 5 crimes and 6 murders that happened consecutively each year from 2012 to 2016 just shouldn't be happening. That's 5 years in a row of unsolved cases. And in a small town like Bardstown, that's weird to me. And yes, Jason was not the first to start these yearly unsolved murders. Let's call it a tradition while we're at it. I mean, that's ridiculous. Citizens of Bardstown have signs all over, including in front of the police department, saying, "Solve these murders." But what did the inmate that wrote that letter to Tommy Ballard have to say about Jason Ellis's death? He said that Jason Ellis was killed because he was getting close to a ring of storage unit burglaries. These people were stealing antiques and also drugs. He also says that Jason had an informant regarding these burglaries, but police never confirm or deny this. Now, believe it or not, the Bardstown Police Facebook page is constantly putting up pictures of storage unit thieves and their vehicles. Just something that I found to be interesting. The inmate says that the night Jason died, there were 4 people. 1 main shooter, 1 backup shooter, 1 getaway driver, and 1 innocent bystander. Okay. When he's asked if he's this so-called innocent bystander, he says no comment. Stephanie Bauer does ask this inmate some leading questions, in my opinion, like, was this a hit? And he said yes, it was. He says that he doesn't know who hired them, but he does know who they are. So when I see someone asking leading questions and then the inmate basically just being like, yeah, that happened, that makes me pause a little bit. When the inmate is asked why these people haven't come forward, 4 people, there's going to be 1 person, especially the so-called innocent bystander, who would come up and say something. And he responded that it's old school. They're all being taken out one by one. The former Bardstown police chief tells Shay McAllister on her podcast called Bardstown that Jason was shot from 2 different directions and 2 different ranges. So he was shot farther away and then closer. He says this could have been 1 shooter and Jason moved, which caused different directions, and the shooter came closer, which caused different ranges. But that also makes the killer seem more ex-military or an experienced hunter, according to Rick McCubbin. But he says that he believes that there were 2 shooters that day. Now, as I said, that inmate said that there were 2 shooters, the main shooter and the backup shooter. He said the main shooter was on the hill and the backup shooter was on the ground, closer to Jason's car. So that is something I find a little bit interesting. Day 1 of Jason Ellis's murder, tips started flooding in. The Kentucky State Police Department were the ones handling the case, but the Louisville FBI also helped. At first, a member of the BMG, or the Bardstown Money Gang, confessed to killing Jason. Now, this person who confessed was actually the Bardstown mayor's nephew. The mayor said he had nothing to do with this, but it just didn't look good. Obviously, this was looked into, but the leader of the gang, Deandra Douglas, was serving a 10-year sentence on assault and drug trafficking convictions. He told police and reporters that neither he nor the BMG had anything to do with the officer's death, and he would know about it if they did. He said that he did not call this, and if he did find out that a member of his gang killed a cop, he would come forward about this since they didn't follow orders. Cops say that this gang is small with no resources and no backbone type of guys. They just get in a lot of fights and do some drugs and maybe sell a little bit here and there. They say Jason's murder was just way too methodical to be accredited to these type of people. So maybe it was a hit, like the inmates said. Kentucky State Police has pretty much ruled out all tips as rumors with no substance. Jason also put someone in jail that night for being drunk and disorderly, so I also wonder if police looked into anyone surrounding that person. Obviously, the guy was in jail, but could someone else have been mad that Jason arrested their friend, their boyfriend, whoever it may be? He was arrested after Jason brought him to the hospital after this man was just laying in the middle of the road, drunk as a skunk. He was just yelling at Jason pretty much when he saw him. But while this guy was at the hospital, he started to hit some of the workers and staff, so Jason was called back to the hospital to get a hold of this guy and arrest him. Jason was also called to a domestic argument where a man wasn't leaving his ex-girlfriend's porch after being asked to leave. So, I mean, it could have been any of these people as well, but I assume police already looked into this, but it's just another theory to throw out there. But here's something that I can't get this out of my mind when it comes to this case, and why I personally, in my opinion, believe that this was an inside job. Obviously, we know that Jason didn't have Figo or his normal canine car. Who would know this, though? Other police officers. But when he called off, he doesn't just say, Jason Ellis calling off or Officer Ellis calling off. He uses his badge number 139. He says 139, Adam off duty, and dispatch responds, dispatch 139 off duty. Now, personally, I don't know any local police officers' badge numbers, but who does know these numbers? Dispatch and other officers. I find it very interesting if Ellis was targeted after work, how they knew he was leaving. I wonder if this person had a CB radio, whether it be law enforcement or a regular citizen. I know you can buy these to check on police scanners and stuff, so maybe this person or persons overheard Ellis call in to say he was leaving, and that's when they set their trap. I just find it a little too hard to believe, though, that a regular citizen would know Ellis's badge number. Just throwing that out there. In May of 2017, 2 retired Kentucky state troopers were assigned to investigate Jason Ellis's murder, along with Crystal Rogers' disappearance, Tommy Ballard's killing, and also the Netherland family murders. These retired troopers were hired to only focus on these cases and possibly try to find any connection between the cases to solve them once and for all. Rick McCubbin also created a new policy that officers are not to call off until they get home or wherever else they're going after Jason's murder. He says, I don't even care where they're going. I don't need to know. I just need to know you're safe. Ellis's death really impacted McCubbin and the entire Bardstown police force. There's a memorial at Exit 34 and also at the police station. A year after Ellis's murder, crime didn't stop. Shay McAllister wonders if the murder of a police officer emboldened someone to commit more crimes in Bardstown. In the next episode of Bardstown Mysteries, we're going to be talking about another unsolved case that happened right outside of Bardstown. But I'm going to leave this episode off with a quote from Rick McCubbin. To the person who knows something, I wish they would come forward. I'm not even talking to the person who pulled the trigger. I'm talking to the person who drove the car, or the person who noticed that a loved one was missing that night or felt something was odd. You hold the vital link to helping us solve this. We know that the person who pulled the trigger will not come forward. So now we must put some attention on the other people who know what happened that night. If you were traveling in the Bardstown area for Memorial Day weekend in 2013, specifically on the Bluegrass Parkway near Exit 34 or Highway 55 near Exit 34 around 2 to 3 a.m., please come forward if you saw anything. Please come forward if you noticed a loved one was acting strange or not home during the night. If you have any information, please call 1-800-CALL-FBI, or you can submit an anonymous tip online. Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Crime, and I'll see you next time.